Hi folks, this is John Adamson, the Rehab and Documentation Guru. I've put together a little presentation for you, and here's the outline. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to examine in part how a PT program has evolved from Bachelor's of Science from when I graduated to now the DPT, and I really think without needing to, and I'm going to discuss my thoughts on that in just a little bit. The other thing is that DPT programs have created a situation where the cost analysis makes a DPT degree of not a lot more value, not as much as you think, than a PT assistant degree. And when I started really looking at the numbers, I realized that there is not a great deal of value in becoming a DPT, and you'll see that in a little bit. The other concern I have is, given the future of our reimbursement structure for therapy services, is it really worth going into debt for a DPT and coming out of college with that debt, with the changes with PDPM, PDGM, and then soon with Part B services that are expected to be cut by 8% come 2021? And also looking at whether or not, with the current situation in our market, whether or not there's enough job openings for new graduates. And there is a growing number of programs that have been developed in the United States, especially the assistant programs. So anyway, that's part of the outline, and so I hope you'll stick around to watch this whole video, because I would love commentary, but I think in the past I've said I didn't think the DPT was needed. And now that I've done research on my own, I'm more strong in that conviction. So back in the day called school, for me, when I graduated in 1991 with a Bachelor's of Science in PT, you of course were required to take classes that were enough credit hours to get your Bachelor's of Science so you could practice as a physical therapist. That was the requirement at the time. And then of course, after I graduated, we started moving towards master's programs, and then eventually, of course, the DPT. Back in those days, when I had a bachelor's of degree in the classes I was taking, there was a lot of filler classes. I mean, classes that helped make up the credit hours you needed for a bachelor's of science, but really did nothing to contribute to my future as a physical therapist. So, for example, I had to take basic algebra. Well, I took algebra 1 and I took actually algebra again in high school because I was not a good high school student. So I just took it again, which was probably good because I did better the second time, but I didn't try. But I took that in college again. Didn't need to. Wasn't necessary. I took basic biology. I took 2 biologies in high school. I took basic and advanced. Shouldn't have had to. Didn't need to take it again. In other words, there was classes that in my first and sometimes even in going into my second year of college that I didn't really need to take again. So I wouldn't say they were part of my core. In other words, they weren't necessary to me being a good therapist, and so they probably could have been eliminated, which would not have given me, of course, 4 years of college. Now let's fast forward to the DPT program. Now we're in a situation where in order to get into doctorate of physical therapy school, you first have to have a bachelor's degree. So you get the bachelor's, then you get an additional 3 years of school, and voila, you're a PT. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at, is it really necessary to get a DPT, doctorate of physical therapy, or could you put it all into a more comprehensive and succinct bachelor's degree? And I believe the answer to be yes. On this slide, you will see the core classes needed to enter a DPT program. These are the ones that are put forth by CAPTA, which is the Accreditation Organization for Physical Therapy. So here it is. You need Anatomy and Physiology 1 and 2. You need Biology 1 and 2. You need General Chemistry 1 and 2. You need General Physics 1 and 2. Psychology and Statistics. And that's it. And I'm going to go over in a minute how I know that that plus DPT can fit into one bachelor's program. By the way, one of the things I forgot to say at the beginning of the presentation was that I got a lot of my information from analysis of the APTA's website, through the Labor and Bureau of Labor and Statistics, from some just general searches on like job sites and whatnot, I was able to piece together this presentation. So you can confirm if you go online a lot of what I'm saying. So anyway, let's talk about the total credit hours that are required as a core to get into a DPT program. And I borrowed this 38 credit hours are required from the core, right from the #1 DPT program in the United States, the University of Delaware. As of 2019, they are considered the top ranking DPT program. So what do they require in the bachelor's? A core of 38 credit hours, and that's it. Now, if we look at the general population DPT programs across the United States, they usually require anywhere from about 110 to 115 credit hours in the 3-year DPT program. So if you take the total core plus DPT, you've got 148 to 153 credit hours combined. That's it. Now, if you look at a typical hours that are required for bachelor's, the minimum requirement right now for a bachelor's degree that I could find was 120 hours, which works out to 15 credit hours per semester over 4 years. That would be what a bachelor's degree would equal. But if you were to take the core plus the DPT and say that was 153 hours, so I'm putting it more on the high side of what the requirement might be for core plus DPT, you get 153 hours total, which would be making you look at doing 19 credit hours per semester. That's very doable. In fact, when I graduated with my BS in PT, I had over 160 credit hours for my bachelor's. Partly it was some extra credit that I did as an honors student, but still I could have easily hit 153 without that. And most of you that are taking PT programs have probably had more than that. You didn't meet just the minimum requirement. So my point here is you don't need 4 plus 3 years to become a PT. You could easily condense it into a 4-year degree, get done within that time, and you would have the same education that's really required, not the unnecessary fluff that's often associated with the programs. So the next thing I want to look at is cost of living versus college, because this is going to weave into the whole narrative I'm trying to get across here. And it's related to the years 1987 to 2016 for some of this data. Some of this data I couldn't quite find that exact time frame, but I was pretty much on that time frame. So why did I choose that? Well, there was a study that was done comparing 1987 to 2016, the average cost of living increase versus the average college increase. And so that was a very useful study for me for the purpose of this video. So the change in cost of living, like buying a house, buying a loaf of bread, buying a car, things like that, from 1987 to 2016, that change in cost of living was 211% on average. But if you look at the same time period, the change in the cost of a 4-year college degree, that was 260% increase. We have known for years that college tuition has outpaced the actual cost of living increases. And some years have been like 8% growth in college tuition versus like a 4% actual growth in cost of living. So there's been a disparity growing over the years for the cost increase of college. Now, if you look at the average Bachelor's of Science back in 1987, the actual cost was just under $40,000. I put about $40,000. In 2016, the average cost was roughly $104,000. That's, of course, it's gone up some more, and it keeps going up more. And this is according to MarketWatch.com. So we can see that college is getting more pricey more quickly than other goods. So, assuming that a Bachelor of Science might cost you roughly $104,000, which is an average across all bachelor's degrees, and is probably fairly representative for most students. DPT programs on top of that do run anywhere, according to the APTA, between $58,000 for in-state programs to $106,000 for private programs. So when you combine the two, the Bachelor of Science that you need to get in order to qualify for a DPT plus DPT, you're looking at a total cost of $162,000 to $210,000. There may be some ways that are a little bit cheaper. There might be some ways that are more expensive. But this is on average going to be fairly consistent with what a therapist is looking at spending to get their degree. So if we look at what the average bachelor's cost back in 1987, which was roughly $40,000, assuming that PT programs were consistent with that, $40,000, and then you look at the average cost in 2016 of a DPT program, $162,000 to $210,000, the cost of living increase during that time, remember, was $211,000, but the cost of becoming a physical therapist went up between 405 to 525%. That is a huge increase in just becoming a physical therapist. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, and that's the amount of debt. So the total cost of the degree program is important to consider, but the actual debt figures are also very important to consider. Now, I couldn't find 1987 average debt information. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. What I did find was the average debt in 1993. The charts on tracking student debt that I found went back to 1993 for whatever reason. The average college debt in 1993 coming out of school was $9,320. And that kind of makes sense. When I graduated in 91, my debt was just over $8,000. But I also had the benefit of the cooperative program through Northeastern University that helped me along the way pay for it. Plus, I was a resident assistant, so I was able to offset any cost of my housing and my food. Now look at the average DPT coming out of school, what their debt is. According to the APTA, the average DPT student coming out of school has a debt load of $83,000 just in student loans, and there's something like another $9,000 or something like that in credit card debt that most DPTs graduate with. But we're only talking about student debt right now, okay? So when you look at the average bachelor's degree, where students were back in 93 with a bachelor's degree in physical therapy versus DPT debt, those students in that time frame have seen 891% increase in their debt load. That is tremendous. Now, what is the average for payoff of debt? Typically, student loans on average in the United States are paid off in a 10-year loan and at a 5.8% loan rate. That translates, if you have an $83,000 debt on average, to $913.16 per month, $913.16 per month. That's a lot of money. That's like a house payment. Now, one thing we can say, and I'm sorry the formatting on this slide is small, I didn't get fancy with these slides, but the average salary of a PT up to 2017 did outpace the growth in cost of living. So back in 1989, which is again the only data I could find that was about close to 1987, the average salary of a PT was $31,013, and that was average across all therapists, experienced and new, etc. So look at the average salary in 2017. This again is new grads and experienced combined was about almost $89,000. So the percentage of growth in that time period was 286%. So it outpaced the 211% roughly average cost of living increase in that time period. So that's important to realize. But what we're experiencing right now, as many of you know, is cost cuts in salaries. Many of you, especially if you work in the SNF, and some of you that are working in home health may experience soon cuts in your salaries. cuts in your hourly rates. I know just based on the industry changes that that's going to trend lower and might put us more in line with the actual just cost of living. So we haven't really seen gains in the reimbursement as a result of the DPT. When it comes to the changes that we're going through now, I have a feeling it's going to be more even keel. Now what I wanted to do now too is talk about what's the average salary of a new grad physical therapist. And I looked on various websites, and this is basically the range I saw. On average, new grad is making, DPT, is making $67,000 to $70,000 roughly. When you break that into a salary per month, you're looking at about 55 or almost 5,600 to a little over 5,800 per month. That's before taxes though. Now, if you were a person living in my state of Virginia, which has a pretty average state tax, plus federal, and were filing as a single person, after taxes, you would be taking home roughly $43.67. That's not even factoring in like your benefits from your job. Now, if you have a typical loan payment of $913 because of your average debt that you have, you would then further be dropped down to $34.54 average as total take home after you've paid your loan. And that's, again, not even getting into what the cost of your benefits are going to be out of your paycheck. So some numbers to consider. Now for comparison, let's look at the physical therapist assistant. Coming fresh out of school, a PTA on average is making about $38,500 per year. That's at least some of the most recent statistics. So you can see they obviously make less, and the average physical therapist assistant in the United States makes about $58,700. Those again might be impacted by the changes with PDPM and PDGM. Thankfully, we're not seeing the 15% reduction in Part B reimbursement as it was originally proposed. So I think that'll help PTAs in the future. Now, again, you look at the new grad PT, what they're average making. Let's say that we're going on with the higher number, $70,000 per year. So compared to a new grad PTA, that's 182% of what the PTA is making right out of college. So you know, on paper that looks great, right? But then you look at the average cost of an associate's degree compared to a DPT, which I said was what, $162,000 to $210,000. The average cost of an associate's degree in the United States is $71.40 for colleges that are local, for like your community colleges, versus $14,600 for private associate degree programs. So you can see it's tremendously less than getting a DPT. If a therapist assistant actually did come out of school with debt, which a lot of them don't, because a lot of them are second career working through it, and because that's not much money, they might have been able to get, you know, like 20-hour-a-week jobs to just keep up with their payments to pay for their student loan, for their education. They might not come out of school with debt. But assuming they do, and the same rates apply as DPT loan repayment, so we're looking at a 10-year loan with a 5.8% repayment rate, a PTA coming out of school would be looking at anywhere from about not quite $79 to almost $161 per month, significantly less than what a PT would be paying. After taxes, because they're at a much lower income, they would have significantly less taxes. They'd be looking at filing single, about $36,000 after taxes, which roughly is $3,000 per month. And then if they're paying for their loan, that might drop them down to anywhere from $28.40 to $29.20 roughly before they're paying for their benefits, okay, just like the PT. So if you compare what the PTA will make after taxes, after loan repayment, compared to the DPT, who's new grad, who's paying on a loan, what they're making per month, look at the difference. It's not much different now. It's narrowed substantially. So when you look at total take home minus repayment of loan, you've gone from 182% difference to more like 118 to 122%. Not as much in terms of return on investment. So in other words, you might have a 182% better salary projection, but your actual take home is going to be significantly less, assuming that you maintain kind of the same salaries for 10 years. And the growth of salary for 10 years of experience is roughly going to be similar for PTs and PT assistants. So if you got a 10-year loan repayment, it's going to take a while for the PT to really cash in on all the extra money they spent with their DPT. So other things to consider. PTAs, they're going to start earning just after 2 years of going to school, whereas you got the DPT still in school for another 5 years. During that 5 years, assuming that the PTA is averaging, what was it, like 36,000 per year, before taxes and loans, that PTA will have earned roughly 192,500 in the course of 5 years before the DPT even gets out into the workforce. And that's roughly, after loan and taxes, 170,400. So they've earned a lot of money before that DPT actually gets there. And they've also done 5 years of loan repayment already, ahead of the DPT even starting their loan repayment. So it's kind of, I covered it and I didn't mean to. So anyway, what's covered here is the DPT, if these numbers hold true, will catch up to the PTA after working for about 11.7 years. It's going to take the DPT that long just to catch up, assuming all these factors are about right. And I've done a lot of number crunching. I think I've got it right, but somebody might have better numbers than me. But it's still going to take a while. Now let's talk about something that a lot of us are thinking about right now with PDPM and PDGM, especially if you're in a saturated job market. New grads versus the job market. I looked on Indeed.com, which is probably one of the largest job search websites out there. And I typed in physical therapist jobs. And across the United States, there were 17,574 jobs as of last night. That's a lot. That's a lot of available jobs. But when I further drilled it down to PRN, the result went to 8,935 jobs were actually PRN. And if I put in per diem, there were 3,858 jobs. Now, some of those PRN per diem were the same job listing. They just listed it as PRN per diem. So I don't know if this is entirely accurate, but I'm going to assume that since I used the word PRN in the title, the actual number of full-time jobs as of last night was roughly $8,639 or $39 for PTs available right now. Now, obviously, that's not all markets, and some of those listings might even be old, so we don't really know. It is estimated, and has been estimated for a while now, that the average new graduate DPTs per year that are coming new into the system are roughly a little more than 10,000 new therapists. Now, it's not clear exactly how many retirees there are per year, but if you look at the statistics, the number of graduates in programs from physical therapy programs has grown statistically significant every year for a long time now, about the same time frame we've been looking at. With that said, we will probably see, even though we are growing as a nation in terms of population, we will outstrip the demand for PTs at some point, and we are seeing that partly with the new payer changes. So at some point, does the DPT who comes out of school find themselves in a position where they might not be jobs available? It's a good possibility. Now, what about PT assistants? Well, Right now, if you look at Indeed.com, or at least as of last night, there were 4,047 jobs listed. Of those jobs, 3,870 were PRN. 1,261 were per diem. And again, I'm assuming, because the total jobs was 4,047, that some of those per diem overlapped with PRN, which means the total probable full-time is 177 jobs. That's it, across the whole nation. And the total new grad PTAs that are expected roughly per year is around 7,000 plus new PTAs. And we know that PTA programs tend to pop up more quickly than PT programs. So anyway, will the supply outstrip the demand? And I believe that it's highly likely that it will. So what were my questions at the very beginning? What prompted me to do this research? One was something that was bugging me, and that was it really possible for a therapist, a physical therapist, to get the same level of clinical education in a 4-year bachelor's degree as they are being stretched out into a DPT right now? And the answer is clearly yes. Yes, it is possible. With some careful structuring of the core programs, core courses, probably with a little bit of streamlining of some of the things that go on in DPT programs right now. I mean, I looked at the courses, they look like they're legit. You know, I looked at several DPT programs. They look like good, solid courses you could benefit from, but some of them clearly could have been integrated into your clinical experiences when you actually are in clinics working under supervising therapists. So that 148 to 153 credit hours might be able to be streamlined even a little bit more and make it a good, viable bachelor's program that is affordable, significantly reducing the burden of debt on the typical DPT. Because if you look at the average cost of a bachelor's degree coming out of school versus the total debt load of a typical therapist coming out of a DPT program, you can have probably therapists coming out with, you know, 15, 20,000 in debt, maybe a little bit more. If they work during their schooling, which, you know, a lot of us had to do. I had to pay for my own schooling. So it's possible to come out with a lot less debt load, which will greatly help the DPT in being viable. And of course, we wouldn't be calling it a DPT probably at that point. So is the DPT worth it? I don't know. I don't think so. And I feel for those DPTs that are out there who are struggling with debt. And I've met DPTs that are struggling with debt. Some of them have more than that 913 average per month. And that's just killing them. I can't imagine it. And then finally, is it worthwhile to consider being a PTA rather than a PT? Well, if current trends continue, possibly. I mean, if your long-term plan is to teach and you want to do evaluations and you want to formulate care plans and you want to have more control, then yeah, becoming a PT makes sense. But if you just want to treat patients, if you have a love for patients, you can become a good PTA in 2 years. Especially if the PTA programs really streamline and focus, and they are much more streamlined, but there are some courses that even associate's degrees have for PTAs that probably don't need to be there. That probably could be removed, and then they can expand their clinical courses just a little bit and help that PTA get out the door in 2 years and be solid, rock solid. So anyway, John Adamson, the Rehab and Documentation Guru. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's going to be kind of long, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about these things and thinking about communicating with the powers that be, like CAPTA, that maybe it's not a good idea to push for these degrees with the way healthcare is changing and reimbursement and the burden of debt that has been foisted upon therapists because of Vision 2020. Anyway, take care. God bless.